Welcome. Today I am here with one of our amazing coaches from the UK. I'm here with Tamra Wright. She lives in London and she is one of our very experienced coaches, does a lot of work with positivity, resilience, and health and wellness. Tamra, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you staying up later in the day to talk to us and share a little bit with us about what you do as a tiny habits coach, who you help, and share with us some of your success stories. I find it really interesting as I know a little bit about you, but I want to dive into this a little bit more because I don't know a lot about this, but I find that it's really interesting that you went through our 5-day Tiny Habits program and then decided to become a Tiny Habits certified coach. Tell me a little bit about that.
Okay, yeah. So it's about 5 years ago now. And the reason I did the 5-day program was because I had probably read a review or a couple of articles about BJ's book. And I thought, oh, that sounds really interesting. And I was actually interested in it from a more academic point of view because I had previously written an article thinking about how to develop a kind of first century personal development movement grounded in spirituality and Jewish values and drawing on contemporary psychology, particularly positive psychology and cognitive behavior therapy. And that was an idea that I had
Mm.
picked up from the late Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And so I had written about this article and it got a little bit of attention. And when I saw the ideas from BJ's book, I thought, oh, this is amazing. This could be like the third component of this project to help people go from, what my values are and what I want out of life and what positive psychology and CBT teach me I should do to bring that into play to actually doing it. Right. So just to take an example, gratitude is an important value in probably every spiritual and moral tradition. And there's a lot of research, as you know, into the health and well-being benefits of having a gratitude practice. And in positive psychology, one of the exercises they suggest is you keep a journal, and every day at the end of the day, you might write down 3 things you're grateful for. What I found myself was that I thought, whoa, brilliant idea. That's a great thing to do. And I got the journal, I put it by my bed. I didn't always do it. And what I realized was using the tiny habits approach, it makes it so much easier for people to move from, I intend to do this, I want to do this is a good idea, to actually doing it. So I wrote an article about BJ's ideas. And as I was reading through the book, I think I must have come across the 5-day program. And I thought, oh, this is amazing. So I tried the 5-day program. And at the end of it, I said to my husband, oh, eventually I want to do the coach training. They train coaches to use this method. And he said very wisely, well, if you want to do it, just do it. What are you waiting for? So I got in touch with you and I booked on the next available course that worked for my timing here in the UK.
What a great journey. And of course, that brought you into our world. And we have had you in our world with our coach community for quite a while. And you're just such an asset there. I'm really interested in diving a little deeper into gratitude and using gratitude as a habit and how you help your clients create that as an ongoing behavior for them.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because I think, for everybody it's different. And for some people it works to have a habit that's something like, after I open my eyes in the morning, I'll think about something that I'm grateful for. For me, it works much better to write things down. But what I realized early on, long before Tiny Habits, when I was trying to do this gratitude journal thing, eventually I realized that if my journal was closed, I was less likely to open it, find a pen, find the right page and do this journaling. And I remember actually thinking, I can't believe how lazy you are. That it makes a difference whether the book is open or not. And then, since doing the Tiny Habits training, it all makes so much more
Yeah.
sense, right? That it's just so easy. There's no friction, right? But also, I wanted to tell you that story because one of the things I've been thinking about working with a lot recently is not so much what people do, but how they think about what they do.
Mm.
And I've come up with this methodology. I call it Eazier with a Z, and the Z is for zap the inner critic.
Mm.
This is a story about, there are other ways of noticing if I make something easier, I'm more likely to do it without saying you are lazy. So one of the things that I'm helping the students on my program do is become more aware of those internal thoughts.
I love the fact that you called out our inner critic. I think we all have them. And sometimes we allow them to be shouting at us and yelling at us, and sometimes we're able to quiet them. Talk to us a little bit more about your work. And I know that you do help students create habits that are focused on the inner dialogue or the inner critic that they're listening to. That I think oftentimes results in negativity for ourselves or a negative identity that we have. So, talk to us a little bit more about the work that you do in that space with Tiny Habits.
Yeah, so in that space, what interests me is that there's a lot of contemporary research that shows that people do better if they don't talk to themselves in this very harsh, punishing voice. And the Yale psychologist, Dr. Laurie Santos, she talks about this in terms of the inner drill sergeant. And a lot of us somehow internalize this belief that we'll only make progress and we'll only change and we'll only do things if we have some very, harsh, tough voice inside. But first of all, it's not really true. And secondly, that's almost a sure way to learn to burn out over time. So what I talk to my students about is finding a gentler and more encouraging way of talking to yourself. And
Hmm.
basically, one of the E's of my Eazier approach is experiments. So I'm saying to them, okay, you've been trying to sort of push yourself for all these years. Now try something different. Try something more encouraging. Try, as we talk about in Tiny Habits, celebrating whenever you do something in the way that you want to do it. Right. So we've been talking a lot about that recently.
Okay, so I'm curious about something that you just said. You mentioned that one of the factors of burnout, or one of the things that causes burnout, is our negativity towards ourselves. How do you see that exhibiting in your students or the individuals that you work with? How that negativity burns them out, and how do you combat that?
Well, I mean, combating it in a sense is easier. You have to first of all persuade them intellectually that they're going to do better if they can learn
Mm,
this other way of motivating themselves or of, in general of talking to themselves. And then I think again, for every individual, it's a little bit different. What the voice says to them, where in the past that voice might have come from, and what they enjoy doing. So, just a different
mm,
example. So, I have somebody that I'm currently working with who wanted to create a tiny habit of going for a walk every morning. And she said, I don't want to do it the tiny habits way where, after I put away the breakfast dishes, I'll go for a walk because that feels too rigid to me. So I suggested to her, well, what if you have a tiny habit that's not, I'll go for a walk or I'll put on my shoes, but I'll ask myself the question, when would be a good time today for me to go
mm.
for a walk? And that worked for her. And that's something that I've been sort of playing with for a year or two now is the power of just asking yourself a question. And again,
Ooh,
for different personalities, it's different, right? But for this person who is a little bit of a rebel, you know, and like spontaneity. She doesn't want a rigid rule of after I do this in the morning, I'll put on my shoes and go.
yeah.
It wants to be more playful and more spontaneity.
I love how you've individualized the tiny habits method specifically for that individual, and I'm sure for other clients as well. I think that's a good example of how fluid the method is and how it being customized and individualized for each person based off what they want to do, as opposed to what they feel like they should do. As you know, in the tiny habits method, we have two maxims. Maxim number one is help people do what they already want to do. And maxim number two is help people feel successful. I think that's a great example of your ability as a coach to really dial in on understanding what is that your clients want to do and how to help them design recipes. And you also mentioned a minute ago about the celebration, and that comes into maxim number one, help people feel successful. What are some ways that you've helped your clients and students feel successful using the tiny habits method or tap into their emotions that then they can attach to behaviors to create them as habits?
Yeah. Well, I'm laughing because just last night I was speaking to one of my groups and we talked about adding smiling to every tiny habit, to
Mhm.
every celebration. But I remembered with a previous group, most of my students are in the UK and their response was, we can't smile all the time. People will think we're bonkers, right? So, for the Brits, we also have to kind of dial it down a little bit. So I tell them, I say, look, you just want to create a little surge of positive emotion to help wire in the habit. It can be gentle and understated. You don't have to go high five yourself in the mirror or do a little, dance around the living room sort of thing. So they accept that. But I was interested in what you were talking about before, that fog maxim of help people do what they want to do. Years ago, I was on a neuro linguistic programming course And I remember for some reason, the course leader said to me something like, I have no difficulty getting my clients to do the things they want to do. I have to help them do the things they don't want to do. And I looked at him and I thought, your people are different from my people. Because my people, I have to work hard to get them to give themselves permission to do what they already want to do, right? Using the tiny habits method really helps with that, because what I say to them, because they come in and they all say, I whatever, I want to clean the house better or go to the gym every day or whatever it is. And it's clear that they think they should be doing these things. And then I explain to them, I say, okay, look, you're learning a new method. And for the sake of learning the method, let's start with something that you really want to do, not something that you should do. And then once you've kind of nailed down how to use tiny habits, you can go to things that are, that you're a little bit less motivated to do. And for some of them, that works because then they feel like, oh, I'm a student now, right? I'm learning a
Mm.
method. So I'm just practicing on doing this thing that I really want to do. But there's a lot of sense of guilt and people not giving themselves the permission to invest in themselves.
Wow, you just hit on one of my favorite buzzwords, and that word is guilt. And, over helping clients overcome guilt, because I think people are programmed to feel guilty when they don't do what they think they should be doing. How do
Mhm.
you deal with that with your clients?
Yeah. Okay. So,
I
so
know
that's
that's a
why,
hard, that's a
in a way,
loaded
that's why I
question.
created this whole framework that I call Eazier.
Yeah.
And I try to get them to, zap the inner critic and embrace a more self-compassionate approach. I think it also helps if I can show them, like when we talk about when you feel bad, does that improve your performance or does it make it worse? When you feel bad, does it make it more likely that you're going to do your positive new habits or more likely that you're going to revert to your negative ways? And most people are able to kind of realize and acknowledge that actually feeling guilty doesn't work anyway, right?
Yeah.
A lot of times people are sort of you can have people who are kind of people pleasers, and so they'll do things for other people, but not for themselves. And what I try to get them to appreciate is that if they're doing something for somebody else out of positive emotions, that's wonderful and healthy. But if they're doing it either out of guilt or out of fear that the person won't like me, then eventually it's not going to be a good relationship for anyone. So it's about trying to get them to think about that emotion of guilt, to acknowledge it when it's happening, and then to sort of ask themselves, is there another way that I could think about this situation?
I think that's really powerful. That's very powerful. Now, Tamara, I know you also do some work in an area called radical resilience.
Yeah.
Explain to me a little bit what that encompasses in the work that you do, and if you have some examples of successes with clients there.
Sure. So radical resilience, for me, it goes in two directions. So on the academic side, I recently published an article with a colleague who's a psychologist. It's about radical resilience in the thought of Rabbi Sacks. And then on the tiny habits coaching practical side, with another colleague on the faculty of the Faith and Leadership organization here in the UK, we've worked together for many years with faith-based leaders. And we realized through the work that we do together that a lot of them could do with more support because they have incredibly challenging roles, as I'm sure you're aware, between their communities and their families and so forth. So we created this program that we call Radical Resilience. And what makes it radical is that a lot of people think about resilience as simply the ability to cope and to bounce back when things are difficult. So it's sort of like you drop a rubber ball and it
Mhm.
bounces back. And what we're interested in is helping people realize that um, that they can do better than that. They can do more and better than just kind of surviving difficult times. They can actually emerge stronger. And so if you think about it, I do this little exercise with students sometimes, and I'll say, fill in the blanks. And I say post traumatic, and everybody says
Mm.
stress or stress disorder. But there's also post-traumatic growth. And some of the stories of post-traumatic growth are themselves astonishing. But also the statistics show that most people who go through some form of trauma do not end up with a long-lasting stress disorder. Many people sort of bounce back to where they were, and many other people actually are able to emerge stronger. And so that's what we're trying to achieve. And the way that we've structured the program, we start, of course, with tiny habits, and then we go through the positive intelligence program, created by Shazad Shamin. And that's a highly structured program that draws on positive psychology, performance psychology, cognitive behavior therapy, and a few other disciplines, and brings them all together into a very manageable set of video content and individual exercises. So we
Mm,
go through that program together. And when I originally started teaching that positive intelligence curriculum, what I found was the people who had previously done Tiny Habits with me did much better than anybody else. And I realized is because now these are people who now have been trained in how to change your own behavior, how to make space in your day for those things that you've said that you're going to do, right? So, yeah, so
yeah.
we do tiny habits. We talk about positive psychology in a kind of big picture way, what it means to lead a good, flourishing human life and the different aspects of that. And we obviously, they learn tiny habits and we go through this positive intelligence program. So I've been doing that now for, I think, about 2 years. And what we
Mm,
found is that most of the leaders that we've worked with, so we started with faith leaders and we now work with a range of leaders. And we're developing programs for entrepreneurs and for healthcare workers. So we feel like we've kind of got the curriculum. And so now we're thinking about who are the other groups of people who might really benefit from this. Another one that I'm actually in conversation with another colleague about is doing one for artists and writers. And we would probably also combine that with working through Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way.
wow. Well, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're seeing a lot of application across all niches and industries where the tiny habits and the easier method, as well as uh, radical resilience, are really helping transform their lives. Is that what you're seeing? And I know
Yes.
you're a huge academic. You study everything, you read everything, you learn about everything. I have a lot of respect for you in that
Oh,
respect.
thank you.
Um, and so it really gives a lot of credibility to the work that you're doing and how you're getting results. So talk about that journey a little bit more on melding all those areas and I'm assuming the tiny habits is the foundation to the other layers that as you're working with people in these different, I guess I could say, areas of life. Is that how to look at that? Or that? I know I did not ask that question very clearly. I'm just really intrigued
Okay.
with how you've taken all. I guess the bottom line is I'm intrigued with how you've taken all these pieces and put them together for the benefit of the people that you're working with. Because it looks like, and it sounds like it's really working quite well for you. How'd you come on that?
So I think that what I like to do is kind of roll things back a little bit, and
Yeah.
because as you mentioned, I'm an academic, so I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist. My field is actually philosophy, and you know, used to be a kind of stereotype of philosophers that they sit around contemplating the meaning of life, and to some extent, in my work, that has been true. Philosopher that I wrote my PhD on is Emmanuel Levinas. He was a 20th century French philosopher. His major teaching is about ethics, is about responsibility for others. And he has a beautiful way of talking about what philosophy should be. So traditionally, people think philosophy etymologically means the love of wisdom. And for Emmanuel Levinas, philosophy should be, everything sounds better in French, but I'll say it in English. So philosophy should be the wisdom of love at the service of love.
Mm.
And so, okay. So I think it's a beautiful idea. People sometimes ask me, how did you go from, French philosophy and the problem of evil to helping people with tiny habits to remember to hang up their keys when they come through the front door in the evening? To me, the bridge is that sort of idea of Levinas's, that thinking and wisdom and curiosity and our intellectual capabilities are wonderful in and of themselves, and we want to use them for the betterment of ourselves and other people. So that was a very long-winded answer to an excellent question. So the other thing is I've been curious about these things for many years in my
Yeah.
own life, right? How can I be happier? How can I make the changes that I want to make and make them sustainable, and so on and so forth. And I read a lot, listen to a lot of podcasts, listen to a lot of audiobooks, and I love to just take pieces from different places and put them together and package them. So that's been incredibly fulfilling for me. And of course, as I'm sure that you've experienced, as you teach people this method and you see how it works for them, it's a positive cycle of reinforcement. So thinking,
Yeah.
wow, this really works, and this is really helping people. I want to give you one case study, actually, with the explicit permission of the person that I've been working with. His name is Luigi Ferrara. He's an old friend of mine. from school in Toronto. And by training, he's an architect. He's worked in the academic world for decades. He was the head of a design school, and he now has his own practice. And he started doing tiny habits with me um, in 2021 or 2022. And so I was just asking him, what can I share that you've changed? He was like, oh yeah, I'm very happy to share publicly what I changed. And he said, for many years, I was so busy with everything else. I didn't do any of my own artwork, and I used tiny habits to start doing drawings again. And I more recently used tiny habits not only to start writing a book, but to finish it. So he's now finished the first draft of his book about his philosophy of design. And he started a novel. And he said, and
Wow.
actually, the tiny habits approach has influenced the structure and the content of my novel. So I've found the structure so that each piece of it can be written in a short period of time when I'm doing my tiny habit of sitting down to write my novel. And the final thing that he said was that um, he's been working out consistently using the tiny habits approach. So that was just, one person who's used the approach to great effect and is really, really happy to have come across this method.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that case study with us. I think that is really powerful. And thank you for coaching him and teaching him the method so that he then in turn can design the life that he wants. That's very powerful. That's remarkable. That's awesome. So I'm going to ask you, obviously you shared some of his recipes, which were really impactful. And what I liked about them is they're very simple. They're simple recipes, but yet they have a big impact. What are some of the tiny habit recipes in your personal life that has been most impactful for you? I know we talked about gratitude as we started. What are some other ones?
Yeah. So I want to share some very small ones. So two kind of technology things, as it were. A year or two ago, we got a new dishwasher. And instead of having the cutlery basket, it has that pull-out tray. And I noticed the first few days I would unload the dishwasher in the morning. Then I start putting the dirty dishes in. And then I would realize that I hadn't emptied the cutlery thing because I'd forgotten all about it. Right? I think if I hadn't already learned the tiny habits method, I would have said to myself, why are you so dumb? Why can't you remember this? Instead of which, it's just like, okay, so I created a tiny habit, and then, in a day or two, that was solved. And then similarly, I got a new USB keyboard, and my old one didn't have an on-off switch for the battery power. You just turned off your computer. But the new one, you're supposed to switch it off at night. And again, it was like a few days of forgetting. And then I was, okay, come on, tiny habits coach. So I created some sort of tiny habits recipe and switched it off. And I like those little things because, they're now completely automatic, but every once in a while, I'll do the action of opening that part of the dishwasher or turning off the USB and think, tiny habit. Very good. I feel like I have so many that it's kind of hard to say that there's just like one that's made a huge difference. But one of the things that I do in terms of exercise that I was sharing with my students last night is that I created the tiny habit of putting on exercise clothes first thing in the morning.
Mm.
And I've maintained that habit, even though my schedule has changed. So I don't always do my workout first thing in the morning. And if I'm going to the gym, I'm going to get dressed first. But I always put on the exercise clothes. And I feel like it's a really good habit to have because there's an aspect of identity there that by putting on my workout clothes, that sort of reinforces and reminds me, yeah, I'm the kind of person who exercises every day.
Yeah. And I love that because when you do change your identity, you behave differently. And that's one
Yeah.
of the residual effects of the tiny habits method that we see as coaches. And that I think, you've shared already quite a few examples of how people have seen themselves differently and how that's impacted their lives. So that's pretty cool. I know you're big into health and wellness and you do teach tiny habits for health, basically micro habits for health. Talk to us a little bit more about that and maybe it fits into that topic or maybe it's another topic, but how people that are interested in working with you or interested in getting in touch with you, what would be their next step?
So my website is called Positively Tiny, so easy to find. And so the health and wellness course is a new one. We're just in week 3 of a 4-week course. And what I do in that course is, first of all, so I called it Micro Habits for Better Health. And the reason I did that was because I realized that when I talk to people about tiny habits, many people have a 5, maybe 10-minute thing that they want to do every day. And they think of that as a habit and they think, oh, I'll use tiny habits to do that. So So I teach them that we're going to call those micro habits, and they're not tiny. And you can use the
Mm,
tiny habits method
mm,
to get you started to do that 5-minute routine if you want to. But the thing you do consistently and the thing that you celebrate is the tiny habit. So we go through this idea of micro habits, and I give them some examples of things that you can do in 5 minutes that make a big difference, right? So it could be, 5 minutes of meditation, 5 minutes of stretching, actually getting on the floor and doing some physiotherapy exercises, which so many people
mm.
struggle to do their physiotherapy exercises, right? So we've got kind of the concept you can make a big difference in 5 minutes. We call that a micro habit. We learn the tiny habits method. I teach them, as I said, so the methodology that I put together, it's really around mindset, is easier. So the first E, as I mentioned before, is embracing empathy and self-compassion. The A is for asking empowering questions. Z is my favorite. It's for zapping the inner critic, and we talk about how to do that. The I is for implementing what we call if-then rules, or in the psychological
Mm.
literature, implementation intentions. The next E is for experiments, right? So experiment with small changes. And that means two things. It means try things, and it also means don't beat up on yourself if they don't go well, because you're just experimenting, right? So you try something and it doesn't work, you tweak it or do something else entirely. And the R is a word that I'm fond of, which is rejoice. So rejoice in small wins. But what I tell them, if they don't like the word rejoice, they can have reinforcements, positive reinforcement. So that's easier. And what I encourage them to do when they're approaching a challenge or wanting to make a change is to ask themselves the question, how can I make it easier? And it's easier with an S, or Tamra's easier with a Z.
Mm. I think that's a brilliant approach. And I see how tiny habits fit so beautifully with implementing that easier method. That's a brilliant approach. Well, anything else you want to share with us before we wrap today, or any other stories or examples, or leave us with a word of wisdom or encouragement?
Okay, I think to leave you with a word of wisdom that sort of draws on the things that I try to teach in these courses is that when things feel hard, you know, ask yourself that question, how could I make this easier? And you can choose, everybody can choose. You want easier with the S or easier with the Z.
I love that. I love that. That's great. Well, Tamara, thank you so much for joining me today and talking about what you're doing and the impact that you have in your area of the world. And I do assume that you do take clients or potential students or clients from all over the globe. Is that correct? You're not
Oh,
just
yeah.
limited to London?
Oh, no,
Okay.
no, no, no. People all over.
All
Yeah,
right.
there's one other thing that I do want to say, Linda, which is that I really feel that I've been extremely lucky to come into the tiny habits world, and I've been connected with a few different coaches from Tiny Habit. It was through the Tiny Habits coaches that I ended up studying the positive intelligence approach. I've introduced a couple of my friends and clients who've then gone on to train as Tiny Habits coaches. And I find it such a warm, welcoming, upbeat community. It's just great to be part of it.
Well, we love having you be a part of it. And we sort of have in our community, as I think you'll agree, we are like minded people. And we're doing what we're doing to make the world a better place, not just for ourselves, but primarily for those that we serve. And you're such a great example of that, Tamara. I appreciate that. Share with us once again what your website is.
Yeah, it's positivelytiny.com. And for people who just like email, you can email me on positivelytiny@gmail.com.
Well, thank you again for sharing with us. And just thank you for your inspiration and just the work that you're doing. You're doing a great work, Tamara.
Thanks, Linda.